Hey, did you know that this past election, 88 million people got their news from a news source that's completely funded and controlled by a foreign country? And not just any foreign country, but an old adversary of the United States. Stay tuned and we'll try to figure out if that's a good thing or a bad thing. So after the election, there's been a lot of talk about media bias. Gallup reports that only 32% of Americans have a fair amount of trust for the media, and that number keeps shrinking. In fact, a clear majority of Americans simply don't trust what we have historically called the mainstream media any longer.
A lot of people were talking about the public's distrust in the media after the election, but as I suspected, it's already dying down. There are no voices representing the mainstream media talking about any kind of media reform or reestablishing its trust with the American people. In fact, the mainstream media has declared a witch hunt to protect citizens all over the world from the pure evil that is in the form of fake news. Even President Obama is spreading the message about the new face of terrorism. More on the tyranny of fake news in just a bit. But first, what is media bias? Well, it depends on who you ask. But for our purpose, media bias is when journalists lose their objectivity, their honesty, their accuracy in reporting the news. Media bias also includes the intentional covering up, glossing over, or overstating the importance of a news event for any reason.
Okay, so now that we're on the same sheet of music about what media bias is and so on, why is media bias such a big deal? Well, because it turns out that in order for a democracy to be successful, we need journalists, but not just any journalist. We need super journalists who are objective, accurate, and truthful. And that's how a democracy flourishes. It's when its citizens are informed about the policies that are taking place in our government, and then we are able to voice our opinion with our vote. And when we're informed, we make decisions that are best for our country. But that's if the information that we're getting is objective, truthful, and accurate. Thomas Jefferson even said,
"The only security of all is in a free press. The force of public opinion cannot be resisted when permitted freely to be expressed. The agitation it produces must be submitted to. It is necessary to keep the waters pure."
So yes, even since America's earliest times, when we were forming the foundations of our democracy, when we were still trying to figure out what freedom actually meant and who freedom actually applied to, because in the beginning it didn't actually apply to everybody. I guess when we were still trying to figure out what freedom meant. And according to Chris Christopherson, freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose. But seriously, since the beginning of our country, we've always understood that journalism is sort of what keeps democracy together. And you can't assist in making decisions and influencing the future of our democracy, the future of our nation, unless you're adequately informed. When I was a kid, I grew up watching the NBC nightly news with Tom Brokaw. It was the mid-'80s. You can tell from the white beard here, it was the mid-'80s. But it was the mid-'80s, and Tom Brokaw would come on, and he would give us the news. It's a terrible Tom Brokaw impersonation, by the way. I'm very sorry, Tom. Matter of fact, I even remember when NBC Nightly News changed their theme. It was in 1985, and they did the whole da-da-da. It was good, wasn't it? Huh? Anyway, it's been that same theme ever since, and I remember the day that they changed the theme. NBC owned television in the mid-'80s. You had The Cosby Show, Family Ties, Cheers. Do you remember all that? It was great stuff. But before you watched any of that, you watched NBC Nightly News. That's how my generation grew up.
This sounds like you need some soup.
The Pew Research Center, so aptly named for their groundbreaking work in studying padded and unpadded church pews. Okay, that was two bad jokes in a row. The Pew Research Center reports that 50% of the population between 18 and 50 get their news online, and that number just keeps growing, mostly because more people are using their cell phones to access the news, and that's no big deal. Unless you're living in a cave somewhere and you're still sporting that flip phone, oh, you rebel you, Pew's information is a no-brainer. We use our phones for everything, but what these statistics aren't telling us is where people are going online to get their news, because that's the real story, and it's scaring the mainstream media and our current president to the point of a paranoid witch hunt.
Something that concerned a lot of people in the media during the election was fake news. Fake news. Now, what exactly is fake news? Let's just address that real quick. Fake news should be kind of easy to identify. You know, something like Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, and Martian alien in a three-way love triangle. I mean, that would be considered fake news. Or is it? And some people think that fake news actually influence the election.
Be honest with yourself. Regardless of your political affiliation, do you really think fake news influenced the outcome of the last election? And yes, I realize that social media makes it possible for authentic and fake news to spread throughout the entire world at the speed of light. And here's some full disclosure. I've been fooled by fake news posted on social media by people I really respect, and yet we were both fooled by fake news, and yes, I even liked and shared the same post, further expanding all the lies. But fake news did not influence my vote. By the time I was posting anything about the election on social media, my mind was already made up. And for most of my friends, regardless of their political party, they had their minds made up as well. It kind of makes you wonder, why post anything at all? It reminds me of a high school pep rally for football teams. They're not really going to affect the score, let's be honest, but it makes you feel better, and pep rallies are fun. Well, Facebook pep rallies are fun until your comment section blows up and you find yourself in a political Facebook war that you could be winning if not for posting the stupid fake news story that started the conflict to begin with. The truth of the matter is that we all have political opinions, and if we have a political opinion, it means we care and we're passionate. And sometimes we all get overzealous, posting on our favorite social media website or reposting something on our favorite social media website. But is fake news really worth our president's time? And ask yourself a very simple question. Why would a global juggernaut like Google or Facebook take up arms against fake news? It's not really in their job description, is it? But that's exactly what Google and Facebook are doing. Google is cutting off ad revenue from any site it deems to be producing fake news. But here's the problem. It turns out that fake news is a new term that doesn't necessarily mean the information is actually inaccurate, only that it may not share the viewpoint of the mainstream media.
All right, Google, I just have one question, or to any of you who may know the answer. Who gets to decide what's fake news and what isn't? Is it done by committee? Is there going to be a Google czar that decides what fake news is and what fake news isn't? Because that's kind of weird. Who gets to decide what's fake news?
Philip DeFranco, legendary YouTube creator and entrepreneur, stated recently in a YouTube video that moves like this are not censorship because these are privately owned companies and they can do whatever they want. And by the way, I'm paraphrasing Phil. And he's right, that's true, sort of. Unless these companies are covering up news at the behest of government agencies for political favors, in which case it's highly illegal. Not to mention the fact that it puts Google in a really awkward situation, and I'm very surprised they actually want to tackle this problem. It could actually backfire on them in the future. It's a bad decision, and it's going to make news weird.
I mean, isn't it easy to see where that could be a real issue? If you're determining what's fake news and what isn't, then your political bias could actually call something fake that isn't fake, or allow something that is fake to spread throughout the internet. It's kind of weird. Imagine that we're back in the 1970s, the early 1970s, during the Nixon administration. Woodward and Bernstein blew the top off the Nixon administration, brought down a president because the president was corrupt. He was a criminal. And Richard Nixon ended up having to resign in humiliation. It hurt our country for a while, but it was the right thing to do for Woodward and Bernstein to charge at this story because it was honest, objective journalism, and they were hated during their own time period by other journalists, by a lot of American citizens who called them liars, and they were even called traitors to their country. So what if you had a couple of bloggers, let's say, and they have this real compelling story that at first no one believed. I mean, no one believed Woodward and Bernstein at first. And they have this really compelling story, but, and I hate to pick on Google, but Google decides that's a fake story. And so that story never gets shared with the American people, so the American people are never informed. Where do you stand on this? Fake news. Whose job is it to decide what's fake and what isn't?
I've used the term mainstream media several times in this YouTube video, and I'm sure you've heard that many times during the last election. But I don't think a lot of people really understand what the mainstream media really is. Typically, the mainstream media produces news that emphasizes a government or corporate viewpoint. And here's the payoff for watching this long YouTube video. All of the information produced by the mainstream media is written and controlled by the most powerful corporations in the world. This is not a conspiracy, it's an absolute fact. These corporations are known as the Big Six, and their power extends way beyond the borders of any nation, and because of their unlimited power, the lines between government-controlled information and corporate-controlled information are blurry at best. For the vast majority of the world's population, it should now be understood that there is no difference, at least by perception of the average viewer, between government-controlled media and corporate-controlled media, because in both cases, their real intent is not just to inform the public, but to persuade the public and to control the narrative due to self-interest.
See, Google, Facebook, and the whole bunch in corporate media or mainstream media, they're not really concerned with outrageous headlines that put Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump into some type of love triangle with a Martian alien. That doesn't interest them. It does interest me. That's some crazy tabloid stuff, man. But seriously, that doesn't necessarily interest the public as much as people may think. And that's not what the mainstream media is talking about right now when they talk about, or Google and Facebook especially, when they talk about censoring, because that's what it is censorship. And since they're private companies, they have a right to do this. But it's just odd because that's where most Americans are getting their news now. So they have a right to censor. And so we've never been in this type of tricky situation before. But here's the thing. Before we jump on the bandwagon and start screaming foul, let's consider where Americans are getting their news right now for the first time. And that's scary too. And that's scary in ways that I don't think a lot of people really understand. Now listen, whether you're a Republican or whether you're a Democrat, or whether you're in the Green Party, Libertarian, or just none of the above or all of the above or whatever, what I'm about to say to you is extremely important. At some point during this last election cycle, at least 88 million Americans, give or take a few million, got their news from one particular news source. And this news source is kind of a new kid on the block. And I've got to admit it, I'm pretty impressed with their news. It was good stuff for what I feel and believe, and I really liked them, and they made me feel great. There's only one problem. They're not actually it's not an objective news source at all. They don't even pretend to be objective. And the name of that website, channel, YouTube channel, whatever you want to call it, is RT. I didn't even know what RT stood for a few years ago. I just thought it was another upstart cable company kind of thing trying to start a news station, you know, like Fox did years and years ago. When Fox did it, it was cool and loved by all. But this was something really different. RT stands for Russia Today. They've been accused of everything from producing absolute phony news, and they're guilty of that, by the way. Then again, so is Fox and MSMBC and CNN. But they are guilty of producing some false news. I found the evidence for that. And they are also guilty of being anti-Semitic on some of their statements. But then again, so is MSNBC, Fox News, and CNN. I'm just trying to make a point here that it's government controlled. The scary part is not the fact that they've produced fake news, because again, our corporate media, our mainstream media has been guilty of the same, or not covering certain news issues that are huge. For example, the fact that we're not running out of oil anytime soon when we're finding the biggest oil reserves we've ever found in history, or the fact that there's huge wars in Africa right now that we're completely ignoring, and the human suffering and the toll and the cost that it's taking on the citizens of these countries in Africa is just awful. And there's been nothing said about it in the mainstream media, zero. Said about some of the horrible things that are taking place and some things that are being supported by corporations who may benefit from this suffering. At least there's an attempt by mainstream media upon occasion to be objective. In fact, I could say this, as much as I like my particular political, beliefs and their persuasion that, that we have, I can honestly say that there are other news channels that every now and then get it right when my news channels don't get it right. But government-controlled news means that a particular government controls that narrative. In fact, what RT says about themselves is that their job is to share the Russian viewpoint. Are they wrong? Well, like I said, it's a pretty good news show. I liked it. It's fast-paced, it's in your face, it's straightforward. Yeah, It's government controlled, which means that there is no objectivity. They are saying what is scripted, and it may be news. And that's how a lot of Americans get sucked into this, is that it may be indeed news, but it has a particular narrative and a viewpoint that may not be what's best for our country. This is a tricky situation. Listen, if you're watching this video and you're thinking, wow, this is just another crazy nationalistic person who believes in lines and blah, 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 you need to hear me out on this. See, you may not believe in nationalism. You may think that the idea of borders and border security is absolutely ridiculous. I have my own opinion about it, and it doesn't matter for this particular video. The truth is, though, is that other countries do have a political viewpoint, and they do have lines, and they do have an agenda, whether we have one or not. And so if we're getting most of our news, 88 million Americans were watching a news program and getting their news from a news source that was government controlled. It may not have been fake news, but it's still government controlled. 30 years ago, this would have been a joke. 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago probably, this wouldn't have even been a consideration or a conversation. We would have accepted corporate news any day of the week with any political persuasion at all over a government media, because that would have been scary, that another government would be influencing the electorate. That's a scary consideration, that your neighbors are being influenced by another country with nuclear weapons. That's scary. And now our media, now think about this, our mainstream media has become so, well, we just don't trust them anymore. Most Americans, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, Green, or Libertarian, you don't trust the media anymore. That you would prefer, and at times I preferred, not even thinking about it, that we preferred news from Russia over our own sources here in America. My question to you as a viewer is, how scary is it that we preferred Russian news over our own media sources? What does that say about our own media? And that's the real trick in this. You see, when the corporate media is referring to fake news, what you're not supposed to really understand is that they're really talking about RT. They don't want RT involved because RT has government views, not necessarily corporate views. And the corporations, the corporate news, they want to play themselves off as the real hero of the individual, that it's their job to make sure that you're informed. But this is the scariest part of all. And this is a really big deal. It's a game changer in journalism everywhere. Because what it's saying is that RT News, Alex Jones, the Drudge Report, alternate news can now be considered fake news if mainstream media deems, and I'm calling Google a part of mainstream media, but if they deem it fake, then it's fake. But that is the same thing that we used to say about government-controlled news in the former Soviet Union, that they alter the news to fit their narrative. And now, the former Soviet Union, Russia, they're producing news, and Americans are finding it more objective and more honest than our own media. And that's just the truth. That's the fact, is that Americans really liked them some government news. That's odd. That's weird. Where do you stand on it? Have you ever watched RT News? Did you like it? Did you realize that you were watching a government-controlled news network that definitely produces propaganda? Well, and my question is, do you think the mainstream media produces propaganda? Most people do. Most people realize that when you're watching mainstream news, and it doesn't matter what channel, that you're watching some form of propaganda, whether it's for the government or for one political party or another. And if that's the case, how is RT News any different if that's the case? They're just sharing a perspective like Fox or MSNBC or any of the other news networks. But it does scare me. It does scare me. As much as I enjoyed watching RT this past election, it does bother me that another country is influencing American voters. And it would be ignorant to think that their influence on American voters isn't somewhat geared towards their own goals and their own ambition and their own ideology that may not necessarily always be in line with what Americans believe. if you're new to A Nose for Life, this is an open topic YouTube channel where we talk about everything. The comment section on this channel belongs to you, so feel free to say whatever you like. You can debate, argue, fuss, whatever. It's definitely a freedom of speech zone, so check your feelings at the door. And if your comments are good, or they make me laugh, or if they're really stupid, I may end up posting your comments on a future video. And if you are from my personal Facebook page and you share and like and subscribe to this channel, magical things will happen to you. Okay, probably not. Nothing will magically happen to you if you subscribe. However, I would really appreciate it if you'd subscribe and share this video, and I hope you enjoy it. I'm Bill Marion, and this is A Nose for Life.